evening. Welcome to our annual college seminar for students on IEPs and 504s. I am Erin Canaday, Transition Coordinator for Dublin City Schools. I want to also introduce the two other transition coordinators in Dublin. I could not have done this evening without them, and that is Kelly Marshall and Kristen Yearling. I think they're still herding people in. This is a collaborative effort that we do with other transition coordinators, and so you will see in your packet the other transition coordinators that we've collaborated with, and that is from Upper Arlington, Grandview Heights, Hilliard City Schools, Worthington, and Westerville. So our goal this evening is for all of you to gather information and leave with a better understanding of how to access and utilize support services at the college level. And I'd like to introduce the panel we have from Bowling Green State University. I'm going to call her Miss Penny. And then we have from Capital University, Ashley Lemaster, Columbus State, Mary Bantu. And then we have OOD College to Career Program Special Cobb, and she's representing Columbus State. We also have a College to Careers Program representative from Ohio State, if you would like to talk to her after. Defiance College is Chris Knight. Mount St. Joseph University, Stacy Mueller. Muskingum University, Dr. Leanne Elkins. Central Ohio Technical College and OSU, representing OSU Newark, Stephanie Rowland. Otterbein College, Kara Manley. The Ohio State University, Kelly Bonice. University of Findlay, Nicole Schneider. Bright State University, Angela Maston. Ready, Denton? So I have questions started and then I'll bring cards to you. Great.
All right, good evening. Again, my name is Denton Warburton. I'm a school psychologist over at Dublin Side High School. Super excited to join everyone today. I know thinking about college and transitioning is exciting. It's a little bit scary sometimes. So I hope tonight kind of provides a little bit of insight into just some of the supports that are provided at the college level and kind of beyond. So we'll go ahead and get started. So a common question that we get from parents sometimes is, what are some of the differences that we can expect between colleges and then at the high school level? So what are some of those immediate noticeable differences that we might experience our first year? All right, we got to take her.
Hello. I am closest to the mic, so I guess I'm up. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. This is a very loaded question because there are so many different aspects of college and of high school. And if you see me afterward, I do have a differences between high school and college accommodations handout that I'd be happy to share with you. I can talk about one aspect in particular, and that is the very general idea that we are changing laws. So K through 12 is under a different set of laws than higher ed. And so once you graduate, your IEP and your 504 plan, those are going to end with high school graduation. So a big part of what we do is we take your access-based needs and your challenges, what your needs are, and we're going to convert those over into college level accommodations that align with the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. And we are accommodating based on equal access, whereas a lot of K through 12 is accommodating more for student success. In high school, we need to make sure that students are graduating on time with their peers and are as successful as possible. In college, we're aligning our accommodations more with equal access under the ADA. And I'd be happy to talk to you more about that in depth, but that's kind of just, I think, a great place to kick us off. And if you have other things to add, because there are differences, homework differences, parent involvement differences.
I was actually going to touch on that. So one of the biggest differences, I think, and the most challenging for students who are transitioning to college, not just students with disabilities, but every student is, in high school, you are sitting in your math class doing your math homework. At the college level, it isn't that way. So a lot of times students are like, wow, I only have to be in class 4 days a week for 3 hours a day. What am I going to do with all my time? Well, the rule of thumb is for every credit hour you're taking, it's 2 to 3 hours of study time outside of class. And so you are going to go to math 3 days a week for an hour, but then you're going to do your math assignments outside of class during your free time. And that seems to be one of the biggest learning curves for that transition between high school and college.
Another thing to add to the comment about the differences in laws is when you come to college, you're 18 years old, and you have to advocate for yourself. So all through K-12 experience, your parents, your teachers have been very involved in your total experience. And when you come to college, you need to seek us all out. You need to find where are the services that you need to best support you and to obtain the accommodations for equal access. We call that being a self-advocate. So it's good to practice now, reminding your teachers about your accommodations and explaining to your parents, practicing what your needs are so that you can be ready to be a self-advocate when you come to college, because your professors will receive information from our offices of what your accommodations are, but then they'll want to have a better understanding of what your needs are and facilitate with you how to meet those needs. So self-advocacy is a big difference that you'll need to be prepared for when you come to college.
When we talk about self-advocacy as far as accommodations go, what are some of accommodations that are available at the college level?
Extended time, perhaps taking a test in a distracted, limited zone or in a different room. We also have accommodations for the use of calculators during tests, the accommodation of perhaps a social or emotional support pet. We have accommodations for foreign language substitution, the use of word processors when you are taking a test, and even we have not so much scribes at our university anymore, but we have the use of assistive technology from speech to text and text to speech that can be used. And the use of technology. So that can mean a wide variety of things based on your need. We also have accommodations for single room occupancy. So some of our students just do better when they're not sharing a room with someone. That is an additional accommodation we have.
At Wright State, we're very well known for serving students who have intensive physical disabilities. So we actually have a program on campus where either it's private pay or funded through Voc Rehab that the students can use personal care attendants that are employed by our office, or they can use a local agency. We have a personal care station, which is basically a staffed restroom for those students who need physical assistance using the bathroom during the day. And that's great because they don't have to schedule going to the bathroom. And that's a huge deal for them. We also produce all of our alt format in-house, including our Braille, which we can also do foreign languages and music Braille and math Braille.
I would just add to that a couple of things. My colleague on the end mentioned housing accommodations. And so when I meet with students, oftentimes the documentation they provide to me is their evaluation team report from their high school experience, right, and their IEP. And since your high school really isn't involved in housing, often there isn't any information in that that would help support your request for that accommodation. So if that's something that you would be seeking, oftentimes you want to plan ahead and maybe meet with someone outside of the university, whether that's a medical provider or a therapist, and have them write documentation to support that so that all is in place when you start at college. The other thing that's kind of unique is I think different schools call it different things, but where I work, we call it leniency in attendance. So sometimes students have a condition that is episodic in nature. A good example of that might be Crohn's disease, where most of the time it's medicated and it's well controlled, but you have upticks in that are unplanned. And so that's another important accommodation that might need medical information. So if you would have an uptick in your condition, you may be able to get an extension of numbers of days you're allowed to be absent without consequence in the class, or you may get an extension on turning assignments in when your condition is impacting you the most. So those are a couple other things that are often available.
We all provide accommodations. And the thing to think about is everything is individualized. So we're going to look at your documentation that you had from high school, the IEP, the ETR, and we're going to have a discussion about what you used and what worked for you and what didn't work for you. As you're transitioning to college, we're going to put those pieces in place, but things may change as you go through your college experience. And so it's really difficult to say day one that these are going to be your accommodations all the way through school. And there are episodic things that happen to you in life that could also impact your journey through college, which may also require additional accommodations. So it's really, really important that you start these conversations early with the schools that you're considering looking at.
When we have students who are applying, a common question I get sometimes from parents are, the university or college that I'm applying to, will they know automatically that my student has a disability? What does that look like as far as admissions goes?
So we typically don't know when you walk through the admissions door if you were on an IEP, 504 plan, have a disability. So we do rely on the student to either bring that documentation forward, initiate that process, but it does start with you as your own advocate. Now, a lot of times we will get from mom or dad faxing in the IEP form, so we do initiate to the student. But as we've kind of alluded to before, some of those laws are changing when you do become an enrolled and matriculated student. Mom and dad are not typically a part of that process in terms of the reach out. So I like to call it the students driving the bus. Mom and dad can be GPS, but if the student doesn't turn, you can say recalculating, but the student is at the wheel.
One of the most common mistakes I see some families make is they will actually disclose to an admissions counselor, and they might even give them a copy of the IEP and the 504, which is not such a big deal, except you still need to come and make that transition to actually one of our offices, accessibility services or disability services offices. I've seen too many times where, we get to midterms and they say, well, I thought my student was registered. I disclosed that to the admissions counselor during the process, and it never got sent to us. And that's really not the admissions counselor's responsibility. The parent and the student needs to come up and meet with us. So really important distinction. In disclosing to an admissions counselor or even giving them the 504 is not the same thing as registering with our office.
So what would be your advice to families if they did choose, if the student decided they wanted to disclose that they are a student with a disability? As far as enrollment goes and first day of school, what would be your advice to them as far as accessing services or how to kind of start that process?
Oftentimes students would like to come and have like a prospective student appointment, maybe even before they're formally accepted into the university. So at Ohio State Columbus campus, you do have to formally be accepted to the university prior to engaging with our office officially, but that doesn't stop you from coming and having a conversation with us ahead of time. With that being said, in terms of timing, I get that question a lot too. It depends really on what the accommodation needs might be. So if it's something like housing where we're starting to fill out those contracts relatively early, I would definitely recommend doing that as early as possible so that we can be there to be an advocate and support to your student who might be seeking housing accommodations. As far as Ohio State Columbus campus goes, of course, at the beginning of semesters, we get really, really busy, so our wait times seem to be a little bit longer. So we see students registering, as early as March or April of their senior years through summer. If they're going to take a visit to campus, maybe come and check it out and have that conversation. And I can also say that registration is probably more accessible than it ever has been. Thank you, pandemic, right? So we can offer the welcome meetings virtually, over Zoom, over the phone, or also in-person options too.
Every school has different resources and different ways that they do this process. And it's really, really important as you're looking at all the different colleges, when you do a college visit, to ask to meet with the Disability Services Office so you can have ask specific questions to make sure that not only is the school a good fit, but the resources that are available, which all of us have the same resources, but offer them in different ways, making sure that the resources that are available are a good fit for your student as well.
In public ed, we have IEPs and 504 plans. What does that support plan look like? Is it like an actual document? What does that kind of look like whenever a plan is kind of crafted for that student's individual needs?
I think every institution probably does it a little bit differently, but there is a formal document. We call it an accommodations memo, but it will get, again, depending on each institution, it gets sent out a little bit differently. Some institutions use kind of an automated process similar to AIM, where the student is able to kind of, after they meet and they're approved for accommodations, they can check boxes and they have more control over it. Other institutions, like Defiance, our office we'll go ahead and send that out to anybody that they would like that distributed to. But there is a formal document, and we help broker that with the professors and other offices.
But it is on the student to say, I am registered for biology and I need my test accommodations for biology. And so the student, not only do they have to register with the office, but for our students and for many of the other students who are using the same system, that they have to tell us which accommodations they want to use for each class. And a student can absolutely choose not to utilize accommodations. However, accommodations are not retroactive. So if they're like, oh, I took my midterm and I failed, so can I retake it with extra time? Nope.
Your IEP, while it could be 10 pages, it could be a small novel, in college, it's usually it's a one-pager. And that's because a lot of your personal information is confidential, and we're not going to be sharing things like your diagnosis or what you struggle with, what your deficits are with your instructors, right? It's just going to be a short list of your approved accommodations, because our role is to make sure that your accommodations are implemented and you know what your accommodations are and how to access them. But the specifics that you often see in IEPs and ETRs is not necessarily going to be included in your college accommodation letter, which is usually like a one-pager. Would you guys say that most of you have a one-pager? So that's quite a shock for a lot of students, so something to keep in mind as well.
So once the support plan is made, how are professors or teaching staff notified of the plan and what accommodations are, agreed on? And then are professors and teaching staff required to provide those accommodations?
Some of the schools talked about they have a software where it would be automated. The student would select which professors they'd like that information sent to. Other schools use a different method. And where I work, we actually email the student probably about a week before each term or each semester their accommodation letter. And on the bottom of it is a place for all their professors to sign. So our purpose with that would be, again, if a student chooses not to use their accommodations, that is their choice. So they would provide that letter, a copy of that letter, to each professor that they would like to use accommodations in the course. The professor signs that, and it comes back to my office, and I keep that in your student's file. That puts the professor on notice, is what I would call that the student has these accommodations. And it also, I hope, gives the student an opportunity to have some interaction with the professor. If they would choose to discuss how they're impacted or what's beneficial to them in the classroom, when they have that letter signed, it gives an opportunity for that conversation to happen, which is a positive thing when that happens. So that's just how we do it at the Mount. Anyone else?
To answer the kind of the last part of that, our professors are bound to provide those accommodations. It's a little bit complicated. The short answer is yes, absolutely, unless the accommodation would constitute a fundamental course alteration or alteration to the program of study. That gets a little complex. And we talk the professors through this, and we have an interactive process between our office and the professor to determine if it would be, in fact, a fundamental alteration. Where I've seen this happen the most might be an attendance accommodation, where somebody needs to be away from the classroom either episodically or for a procedure, and they need to be away for an extended period of time. and the professor would say no, and actually in-class attendance is kind of a fundamental part of this course, and then we have that discussion with them. But hopefully that answers your question a little bit.
So there's a lot of extended time that's provided as far as assignments goes and things like that that happen within the public schools. What does that look like at the college level as far as extended time for assignments and due dates?
This is a great question. And I think one of the things that we need to clarify is we've all used the term accommodations, extra time, accommodations in the residence halls, those kinds of things are accommodations. What we see coming to us a lot of times from the public schools is modifications. And so the difference is modifications modify the expectation. Fewer answer choices on a multiplication or a multiple choice test, shorter pages on a paper, in word bank on a test. Thank you. Those kinds of things modify the expectation. So in college, professors give everyone in the class a syllabus with the expectations on it. Everybody takes the same test. Everybody completes the same expectations for the assignments. However, there can be some alterations to the format, like oral testing, a reader or a scribe for testing, and those kinds of things. So in answer to the question of extended time on assignments, what I tell our students is talk with your professor. If you think you might need some additional time, talk with your professor about your needs. Again, it's that self-advocacy piece and how your needs can best be met. And that would be the same thing that any professor would say to any student. If you have an emergency happen in your life or you need some extra time, talk with your professors. On our campus, we don't formally do extra time for assignments. We do extra time for tests, but the issue with extra time on assignments is the semester will eventually end and the snowball starts to roll down the hill if you don't keep up with your deadlines. And we're helping you prepare for life after college, which is a job, and there's going to be deadlines in the job too. And so we want to help you learn to manage your deadlines and become competent with managing your time. So accommodations, at least on our campus, do not include extended time for assignments.
Okay.
I can say at Ohio State specifically, so extended time for timed assessments versus extended time for assignment deadlines is they are two separate accommodations. And so the latter, kind of the attendance and deadline flexibility, is an accommodation we approve for students who have a condition that can flare unexpectedly. And so something similar to Crohn's disease, something where it's unexpected throughout the semester and it might warrant a little bit of flexibility around class attendance, the ability to make up quizzes or exams, as well as having deadline extensions. And going back to kind of that first piece of like extended time, so like time and a half, double time on those scheduled timed assessments, that is something that's separate, and students would schedule at Ohio State to take those with our office. We have a testing center. What I will say we get a lot of with the accommodation for attendance and deadline flexibility are students who experience some struggles around executive functioning, and they're hoping for that attendance and deadline flexibility for something like an ADHD diagnosis. What I can say is that currently we don't approve that attendance and deadline flexibility accommodation for those types of barriers. What instead we would do is refer students to our Dentist Learning Center, and I'm sure several other schools here have something similar like academic coaching to kind of work through some of those barriers and figure out ways to address that kind of from a time management perspective, organization, whatever that might be from an executive functioning standpoint.
Also, just to add to that real quick, there are other things that we can assist with if that's a concern. Like at Columbus State, we offer priority registration for students who are registered with accessibility services. So we help students who are registered with our department to schedule their classes a week earlier than the other students so that students are able to mindfully schedule and not take on too much. And you also have to remember that in high school, oftentimes you're taking like 7 classes a day, 5 days a week with homework due every single day. in college, it's structured differently from the get-go. You're not in that kind of setup anymore. You're taking maybe 2 or 3 classes that meet maybe twice a week, and there's a lot more built-in time to utilize your syllabus, to stay on top of deadlines, and to mindfully schedule and manage your time a little bit differently than what's expected of you 5 days a week in high school.
When we talk about accommodations, one last kind of follow up for this part. Is there ever a time during the students' kind of time at university where you reevaluate the need for accommodations, or at some point you're kind of like, actually, these aren't things that we're using and things like that? Is there ever a time where that conversation kind of happens, or once the plan's made, is that kind of set moving forward?
Typically, the student has to initiate that process. Hey, my accommodation isn't working for me. Can we have that conversation? At University of Findlay, there is a natural kind of space for that. Every semester, we resend at the end of the semester, send out your accommodations. Hey, these are, kind of what you have been using. Are they working for you? If not, please schedule and come on in. We do that as kind of that natural kind of cutoff before we're ready to hop into that next semester to say, hey, how are things going? But at any time, if your accommodations are not fitting your needs, because it's a little bit different in college from high school, and you might have different needs based on what program you are studying. So at any point, you as a student are able to initiate those changes.
As far as accommodations go for online coursework, what does that kind of look like, and how does that differ between accommodations that might be appropriate within the in-person learning platform?
It depends on the school and it depends on the class. So if you're taking an online class and all of the exams are on the computer, you would still work with your instructors. We'd still work with your instructors to get your extended time. They would just put they would extend your testing time within whatever online learning testing environment you're in. If it's an asynchronous course, it really depends on the type of course. It depends on, so for the Newark campus, we are moving away from online classes at the OSU Newark campus. And so our faculty are not required to offer an online option if it doesn't already exist within the course syllabus, because then we would be fundamentally altering that course for the instructor. But from the COTC side, there's still a lot of courses that are happening online. So for my campus, it's very individualized based on what the faculty want to do, what the student needs.
And I would add, this is just a great space to really think about, how does my disability functionally impact me? And then have that conversation with Accessibility Disability Services Office so they can help you to understand, so what's the expectations in this class? Okay, so your disability functionally impacts you this way. How might we put some accommodations in place to help you achieve that equal access? So really thinking about now, what's the functional impacts so that you can have those broader conversations regardless of the format of class so that they can be most helpful to you.
When applying for university and students on IEP or 504, what are some characteristics or traits that a family or student should be looking for in the university as far as what services are provided? There's a lot of different disability programs at universities. I keep hearing about one in particular on here. So what are kind of your thoughts on that? We'll take 2 people.
I think you have to find what that fit is for yourselves. And so we always say, like, I think Steph said it earlier, it's come visit the campus and see, somebody said it earlier, come visit the campus and see if not only the university or the college is a good fit, but is that disability services office the right fit as well? Because those are probably going to be the people that you work with for those next 4 or 5 years. And do they seem supportive? What is their process? Does it make sense to you? Are they answering your questions in a way that you would hope they would? What are the questions or what are the answers that they give you about how they might support you in your program? What is their experience with supporting prior students who have a similar diagnosis? I think the way that those interactions go can often tell you in your gut if it's going to be the right fit for you or not. So specific traits is hard to kind of identify, but sometimes it's just about that feeling of this is the right place for me and this is going to feel like my home for the next few years. One other thing I wanted to mention that came to mind is some of those accommodations, like Steph was talking about with online, or before Kelly was mentioning about extended time on assignments, a lot of those can vary by class. And so for students that may be approved at those at an institution, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to look the same way for every single class all the way through your college careers. So that comes back to that fundamental alteration idea. And if that's going to be an issue in a class, we had a student once who asked for flexibility with public speaking assignments in a public speaking course. That is a fundamental alteration for that kind of course. The nature of that is public speaking. And so we couldn't offer that kind of accommodation for that class. And so the same might be the case for assignment deadlines and whatnot. You might get some in one class, you might get nothing in another, and you may get one day in a third class. And so just having those conversations early on, feeling out the office in addition to the school, can be really important and helpful in this process.
One of the most important tidbits of information we give to both parents and students is this. Whichever institution you're looking at, make sure that you ask them if they have a supporting program for students with learning differences. That is so important because that gives you a point of contact for not only reference, but for support. So in addition to the Office of Accessibility Services or Disability Services who provide you and support you with accommodations, you'll want to see if there's another support program and or office on campus where your student can go. Because remember, they're going to be learning how to self-advocate for themselves. And if they've got a question or a dilemma and they start feeling overwhelmed, they need some place to go where they can not only get support, but direction. And so that's the number one tidbit of advice we give to our parents and students.
So at this point, students and families are starting to explore options moving forward. What is a piece of advice that you would give them kind of now as they start to think about that process and things like that? When should they start? When do you feel like these conversations should be had? What does that look like with the school team? What's a piece of advice that you would give to families right now?
I recommend that students at least come visit us the spring semester prior to when they would enroll. So on the flyers I have on our table, it actually has a timeline that I suggest of March or April. Come in, submit documentation, get a feel for our office, learn how things are going to work. And then we don't do their welcome meeting until closer to the start of the semester because they forget everything and we have to do it twice. But it just really helps to make sure that the paperwork end is taken care of early, that you know where you're coming when you come back at the end of July or August, and then we can kind of get the ball rolling from there.
All of the campuses provide support, all the same supports in different ways. And so making sure that it's the right fit, whereas there are some campuses that have programs that are specifically for students with disabilities who provide extra one-on-one support. Depending on the level of need for your student to be successful, you might want to look at that type of program for your student. If your student is more self-advocacy based and can navigate their experiences a little bit more, then you might want to consider that. But it also matters on what type of program, what type of physical space your student wants to attend. Are they looking at the big 50,000 student university? Are they looking for the more small, intimate classroom? Do they want a campus that's, well, we're all fun, but do they want a campus who has more, yes, has more activities to engage students than other campuses? Do they want to live on campus? Do they want to live off campus? What is going to work best for your student? Those are the conversations that you want to start having now. And I encourage you to look at all of the different types of schools and programs and have those conversations. And as you're doing your college visits, maybe try and pick one in a couple of 3, 4 different buckets and have that individual experience, and then you have something to compare it to.
Even before you come to meet with the accessibility office, part of that process at most schools will be an interview with your student. And generally, it's just a staff person from the office and the student in that. So a lot of students haven't had any practice talking about what their strengths are and what their challenges are and what accommodations they've used and how they've been a benefit to them, what things they've tried that haven't worked well. And so I think having almost a practice of that, asking those questions, thinking how you would answer those so you're prepared for that interview is a good way to prepare for the meeting.
Last question, just for sake of time. There's a couple people from the audience who've asked the same question, and that is concerns regarding professors or teaching staff's maybe bias or perception toward the student once they find out that they are receiving accommodations and support. Does anyone want to speak a little bit on kind of that concern from some families in the audience?
I would like to address that. I was a professor for 12 years in both undergrad and graduate courses. And I think that maybe that might have been a concern, maybe a time ago, but today I don't believe it's a concern at all, because on any given course, I might have 12 to 15 students who presented me with their letters of accommodation. We are in a much more welcoming time now than we've ever been, and we can understand differences today that we didn't really understand years ago. So if that's your apprehension, or if you even feel like that might be a concern, if I were you, this might be difficult, students, so I'm talking to you right now. If you feel like that professor is treating you a bit differently, advocate for yourself and ask if you can just chat with that professor and explain and let them get to know you. Because oftentimes, if we're feeling awkward, it's because we have a lack of knowledge or understanding above all. And another thing, and I'm going to say this gently because I believe it to be true on several levels, when we're in K-12, we are taught to be educators, right? The teachers are taught how to educate. They know pedagogy and the way children learn. When you get to the university, you have professors. They profess what they know, right? Many of them don't have a background in understanding education theory and principle. It's not that they don't want to help those that have special needs. It's often that they just don't know how. And we have found them, at least at BGSU, to be very, very eager to learn. They've even come into my office to meet with me and my other colleagues to ask, how can I accommodate this student's need? So if that's your concern, number one, ask your dinky darling to go meet with that professor and chat with them and let them get to know him, because you are dinky darlings. You might be 18, but you're dinky darlings. And then secondly, always use your Office of Accessibility Services or Disability Services so that they can give you some ideas, or perhaps even contact that professor.
We take ownership of educating our campus communities about accommodations, access, equitable experiences for students. And so that might mean getting in front of campus partners, faculty, specific academic programs maybe that have been problematic in the past because they didn't have that prior history in teaching. And so we do a lot of education in the way of presentations through faculty consults. If a situation does become problematic, we have a really great ADA coordinator's office, and most of us have similar positions on our campus who can go out and educate them, because a lot of times it's not that they're, not accommodating because they just don't want to. It is just that they might not understand, and they may not have been faced with a situation like this from a student before. And so we do take ownership of that. I will say at Ohio State Columbus campus especially, to make sure we're going out there and we're being partners to them too, and so that they feel comfortable coming to us, those instructors, with those questions that they might have, to avoid that. If all else fails and your student does run into a wall at any point, I want them to know, I want you to know as their parents, that there are grievance procedures out there. Part of our duty as an office is to protect and advocate for your student if that were to occur. Again, I think it's incredibly different than it was 10 years ago when I started in the field, but if that happens, please know that there are protective factors there to protect your student.
I think with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up the panel. Thank you all so much. What a great way to end.